The lock gave way at 3 in the morning, and the cold marble of that basilica swallowed the sound of my own breathing. I had broken into churches before, 41 of them across 9 years, and I had never once felt watched. But that night, the moment my flashlight crossed the glass of the tomb, something looked back at me. A boy, lying there in jeans and sneakers as if he had fallen asleep moments ago, and his face was not the face of a corpse. I dropped the crowbar. It rang against the stone like a bell I hadn't asked to ring. My name is Tomas Wieczorek. For 19 years, I was a professional thief, and I specialized in one thing only: religious art. Chalices, reliquaries, gold leaf pried from old altarpieces. I robbed 11 churches in Italy alone, and I slept like a child afterward, because I believed in nothing. Not God, not punishment, not the soul. My mother used to light a candle for me every Sunday in Krakow. I told her she was wasting wax. The only domestic thing I cared about back then was a small espresso machine in my rented flat in Perugia, which I cleaned more carefully than I cleaned my own conscience. So understand me when I say that what happened in Assisi was not the unraveling of a religious man. It was the unraveling of a man who had no religion left to lose. 3 things happened in that basilica that I could not explain for years. The first was what the temperature of that glass told my bare hand at 3 in the morning, when by every law I understood, it should have been ice. The second was the object I took from that tomb and carried in my coat for 11 years without ever daring to open it. And the third was the name a boy I had never met whispered into a room where no one living spoke. The same name a doctor would say to me in a hospital in Monza 11 years later, on the exact day a stranger told me I would die. For 19 years, I told no one. Not the police, who eventually caught me for other crimes. Not the priest who visited my cell. Not my own mother on her deathbed. Today, I tell all of it. I want to take you back first to how a Polish boy with steady hands and no faith ended up making a living out of God's houses. My father was a locksmith in Nowa Huta, the steel district outside Krakow. He taught me locks the way other fathers teach fishing. By 14, I could open anything with a tension wrench and a paperclip. And by 19, I understood that the most valuable, least protected objects in all of Europe sat behind nothing more than a wooden door and a faith I didn't share. Churches trusted God to guard them. God, in my experience, was a terrible night watchman. I moved to Italy in my late 20s because Italy was, to a man like me, an open vault. I learned which dioceses had insurance and which didn't. I learned that a 14th century chalice could be melted in an afternoon and sold as scrap gold by Friday, and that no one melts faster than a man who feels nothing. In the autumn of 2006, a fence in Naples told me about Assisi. He was a careful man, this fence, and he never sent me anywhere blindly. He said there was movement in Assisi. A boy had died that October, 15 years old, and people were already coming. Not many yet, but coming. Leaving things. Coins, medals, little gold crosses, ex-votos pinned near where the body would be laid. He said the diocese hadn't organized any of it, that the offerings were piling up faster than anyone could catalog them, and that an uncatalogued offering is, to a man in my profession, free money. He told me the boy's name. I forgot it within the hour. It meant nothing to me then. What interested me was the logistics. The body, he said, had not yet been moved to its permanent tomb. That would come later. But it was already being kept in the lower church of a basilica in Assisi, and the security around it was nothing. A single old door, a lock from the 1950s. No cameras in that section, because who films a dead child? I drove up from Naples on the 11th of November, 2006. I remember the date because the radio in my rented Fiat kept playing a song about saints, and I laughed at it, alone, doing 90 on the autostrada. I arrived in Assisi after dark and did what I always did. I walked the town as a tourist. I counted the streetlights on the approach to the basilica. 11 of them, and 3 were burnt out, which told me the municipality was broke and inattentive. Good for me. I noted that the Carabinieri station closed its front desk at midnight. I noted the angle of the moon. I ate a plate of pasta in a place near the square and paid cash and tipped nothing memorable. And I noticed something I wrote off at the time. There were people praying outside the basilica at 10 at night, in the cold. Young people. A girl, maybe 17, with a backpack, kneeling on the stone steps, crying without drama, the way you cry when you actually mean it. I thought she was high. I thought a lot of stupid things in those years to keep the world simple. At 2:15 in the morning, I came back. I had a small leather roll of tools, a flashlight with a red filter to protect my night vision, and a canvas bag for whatever I lifted. The side door of the lower church gave me less trouble than the lock on my mother's pantry. 40 seconds. I was inside before my own heartbeat had finished its second beat. And here is the first thing I cannot explain, the thing I have turned over in my mind for 19 years. The lower church was cold. Stone churches in the Umbrian November are always cold. I had robbed enough of them to know the exact bite of it, somewhere around 8 or 9 degrees Celsius at that hour. My breath fogged. My fingers, even gloved, began to ache within minutes. The thermometer I carried, a small digital one I used to gauge whether wax seals would crack when I pried them, read 9.2 degrees Celsius near the entrance. But there was a warmth coming from the far end of the room. Not a draft, not a heater. I checked for vents, for pipes, for any radiator, and there were none in that section. The warmth had a direction. It increased as I walked toward the place where the offerings were piled, and where, behind a low temporary barrier, the boy lay. I told myself it was my own body. Adrenaline. A thief's blood runs hot. I have talked myself out of 100 true things with explanations like that. I crossed to the offerings first, because I'm a professional, and the dead don't carry wallets. There was a heap of them on a cloth-covered table, exactly as the fence had promised. Medals, rosaries, folded papers, coins from a dozen countries. I began sorting by feel, gold from base metal, the way I'd done 1,000 times, and my hands were working when my flashlight, set down on the table, rolled and turned its weak red beam toward the glass. And the boy's face came out of the dark. I want to be precise, because for 19 years people have assumed I exaggerate. I did not see a glowing figure. I did not hear a choir. I saw a 15-year-old boy, lying on his back, dressed in ordinary clothes, hands folded, and his skin had the color and the softness of sleep. Not the gray of death I had glimpsed in 2 other churches by accident. Not the waxen mask the dead wear. He looked like he might open his eyes and ask me what I was doing. My thermometer was still in my coat pocket. I don't know why I did it. I was not a curious man. Curiosity gets thieves caught. But I took it out, and I held my bare hand flat against the glass of that case. The glass was warm. Not room temperature. Warm. I pulled my glove off the other hand to be sure I wasn't feeling the lining, and I pressed both palms to it. The reading I forced myself to take, holding the little digital thermometer against the surface for a full 30 seconds, was 26.1 degrees Celsius, in a room measuring 9. I stepped back. I told myself the boy was recently embalmed, and that embalming involves chemicals, heat, processes I didn't understand. That was my solution, and for about 90 seconds, it worked. Then it stopped working, because I have seen embalmed bodies. I have robbed a funeral home in Bologna, and embalmed bodies are not warm. Embalming makes the flesh cooler and firmer, not warmer, not softer. The chemistry runs the wrong way for what I was feeling. So the explanation that calmed me created a worse problem. If it wasn't embalming, what was generating heat inside a corpse that had been dead for a month? I should have run. Every instinct I had built over 19 years told me, take the gold, leave the dead. You don't need to understand. But I stood frozen at that glass, with my two bare hands on it, and I did the most foolish thing a thief can do. I looked at his face for a long time, and while I was looking, a voice spoke behind me in the empty church. I spun so fast I knocked the flashlight to the floor, and the red light spun across the vaulted ceiling. There was no one. The lower church was empty. The side door, my door, was shut exactly as I'd left it. I stood with my back to the glass, and my pulse hammering in my throat, and I waited, the way prey waits, every sense screaming. The voice had said one word. It was a name, and it was not Italian, and it was not the boy's name, and it was not a name I knew. But I would learn that name 11 years later, in a hospital, from a doctor's mouth, and on that day, I would fall to the floor exactly the way I am about to tell you. Hold that. I'll come back to it, because it is the center of everything. That night, in the basilica, the rational part of me reasserted control the way it always did. I told myself, acoustics. Old churches play tricks. A pigeon, a settling timber, the mind inventing words from random sound. I picked up my flashlight. My hand was shaking, and I despised it for shaking. And I went back to the offerings, because I am ashamed to say my fear did not make me honest. It made me hurry. I scooped what I could into the canvas bag without sorting. Gold and brass together, metals and junk, fistfuls of other people's prayers. I told myself I'd separate it later. My discipline, the patient sorting that had kept me uncaught for years, abandoned me. I wanted to be out. And as I swept the last of the table into the bag, my gloved fingers closed around something that did not feel like the rest. It was a small object, wrapped in a square of folded cloth and bound with a single loop of plain twine. Not jewelry, too light. It had the shape and heft of a slim notebook, or perhaps a flat case, no longer than my hand. Someone had taken care with the wrapping. The cloth was clean. The knot was deliberate. I almost left it. There was no gold in it, I could tell by the weight. But thieves are magpies, and anything wrapped that carefully suggests value to a wrapper, even if the value is sentimental, and sentimental things can sometimes be sold back. I dropped it into my inner coat pocket without a second look. I did not know I would carry that wrapped object, unopened, for the next 11 years of my life. I did not know it would survive a prison sentence, 2 countries, the death of my mother, and the slow collapse of everything I thought I was. And I did not know that when I finally untied that single loop of twine in a hospital room in Monza, what was inside would name the exact day, the exact place, and the exact person. I zipped the bag. I made for the door, and the warmth followed me. That is the detail I have never been able to explain to anyone. The detail that made the priest in my cell go quiet years later. The warmth in that church did not stay by the body. As I walked toward the exit, the band of warm air moved with me, around me, until I reached the cold threshold of the side door. And then it stopped, like a hand let go of my shoulder. I stood in the doorway. I turned back one last time, and I shone the red light across the lower church. And I will tell you what I saw, because it is the thing that began the unmaking of me. The boy's face was turned. I swear before whatever judges men that when I first saw him, he lay face up, looking at the ceiling. And now, in the red beam, his head was inclined toward me, toward the door, toward the thief leaving with his neighbor's prayers in a canvas bag. I ran. I did not stop running until I reached the Fiat, and I drove out of Assisi with my headlights off for the first 2 kilometers, like a man fleeing a fire. And only when the town was gone behind the hills did I pull over onto the gravel and vomit into the weeds. I told myself it was the pasta. I want to be honest about what kind of man I was in the days that followed, because the easy version of this story is that I was struck down and converted on the spot, and that is a lie. And Carlo Acutis, for that I would learn was the boy's name, never wanted lies told in his name. I went back to Naples. I sold the gold. I separated it in a rented garage under a bare bulb, and the warmth I had felt in Assisi was gone. And in its absence, I convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. Cold churches, adrenaline, a guilty man's nerves. The medals and rosaries I sold by weight to a dealer who asked no questions. I made in total just under 9,000 euros from that night. But three things would not melt down. The first was the wrapped object, which I had meant to sell and somehow did not. Every time I picked it up to take it to the fence, my hand stopped. I cannot explain it better than that. I would hold it and I would feel the warmth of that church again, a phantom in my palm, and I would put it back in the inner pocket of my coat. It became a thing I carried. I stopped questioning it, the way you stop questioning a scar. The second was the temperature. I am a practical man, and practical men keep records, and I had written it down out of habit on the back of a receipt. 26.1 degrees in a room of 9.2. I kept that receipt. I would take it out at night in cheap hotels and stare at the numbers, and the numbers would not behave. There was no chemistry, I knew, that produced them. The third was the name, the words spoken in the empty church. I could not even spell it. I only had the sound. I asked no one, because asking would mean admitting I had heard it, and I was not yet ready to admit I had heard anything at all. So I did what cowards do. I changed the subject of my own life. If what you have heard so far has stirred something in you, if you carry a name of your own that you've never said aloud, someone you want to pray for and haven't found the words, I prepared a novena to Carlo Acutis, completely free, so that you can pray for exactly that, over 9 quiet days. It's in the description, the first link, right below this video. Download it and pray it for whoever you're carrying. But before I tell you how I learned that boy's name, I have to tell you what happened the first time I tried to get rid of his wrapped gift, because it did not go the way a man of my trade would expect. 8 months after Assisi, in the summer of 2007, I tried to sell the object. I had a buyer in Florence who dealt in ecclesiastical curiosities, relics, devotional items, the strange little market of holy things. He was the right man for an anonymous wrapped parcel from an Italian church. I took the train up with the object in my coat, even though it was June and I had no business wearing that coat, and I sat across his cluttered desk and put the parcel on the green leather between us. He looked at it for a while without touching it. Then he asked me where it came from. I gave him the lie I always gave. An estate. A deceased aunt. He nodded, the way men nod when they've stopped believing each other for a living. And he reached for the twine. And I took it back. I did not decide to take it back. My hand crossed the desk and closed over the parcel before my mind had voted on the matter, and I heard myself say I'd changed my mind. The dealer raised an eyebrow. He'd seen sellers get cold feet over provenance, over price. He had not, I think, seen a hardened fence physically snatch an unopened item off his desk, like a mother taking a knife from a child. He asked me, half joking, if the thing was cursed. I laughed. But on the train back to Naples, with the parcel against my chest, I felt the warmth again. Faint, a low coal of it through the cloth. And I understood, in a way I had no words for, that this object was not for sale. Not because of what it was worth, because it was not mine to sell. Even a thief has, somewhere far down, a sense of what belongs to whom, and that sense, dead in me for 19 years, woke up around that one small wrapped thing and would not go back to sleep. I want you to hold that detail, because it will matter enormously later. I tried, and I could not, and I did not understand why. That summer, I made a decision that I told myself was strategic, and that I now believe was something else entirely. I left Italy. I told my associates the heat was on, which was partly true. A robbery in Arezzo had gone bad, and the Carabinieri had a partial description of a Polish man. But the real reason was that I could not work in Italy anymore. Every church I cased, I saw that lower church in Assisi. Every cold nave reminded me of a warmth I couldn't explain. My hands, my one reliable asset, began to shake on jobs. A locksmith's son with shaking hands is finished. I went to Germany, to Cologne, then Munich. I told myself I was the same man in a new market. But here is the worst problem, the one that opened underneath my new life like a sinkhole. The steadiness did not come back. For 19 years, I had felt nothing during a job. No guilt, no fear, no hesitation. That emptiness had been my professional gift. And after Assisi, the emptiness was gone. And into the space it left came something I had no defense against, because I had never built one. I began to feel. I robbed a small church outside Munich in the autumn of 2007. A clean job, a side chapel, an unguarded reliquary. And as I lifted it, I thought of the girl on the basilica steps in Assisi, the one crying in the cold, who I decided was high. I thought, this reliquary is her. Someone is kneeling for this somewhere. And I put it back. I put it back. A professional thief, mid-robbery, returned the take and left with nothing, and stood outside in the German rain and did not know who he was anymore. That was the beginning of the end of my career. And I want to be clear that I am not telling you a sweet story. The end of my career was not a beautiful surrender. It was a slow, ugly disintegration. Within 2 years, I was drinking. Within 3, I was making mistakes I would never have made. Because a man who feels guilt cannot plan a robbery cleanly. Guilt is noise in the signal. And in 2011, in a botched job at a chapel near Salzburg, I was caught. I went to prison in Austria. 4 years. And it was in that prison, in the small library, that I finally learned the name. There was a chaplain who came on Thursdays. I avoided him for 2 years. I had no interest in his God. And I assumed he had no interest in a man who had robbed his houses. But the library had a shelf of religious magazines, donated, mostly Italian and German. And one gray afternoon in 2013, with nothing else to read, I picked one up. And the boy's face was on the cover. I knew him instantly. The same face I had seen through warm glass at 3 in the morning. The dark hair, the slight smile, the ordinary clothes. Below the photograph was a name in bold type. Carlo Acutis. And beneath the name, the sound I had heard in the empty church 7 years earlier finally found its spelling. I had heard it. I had not imagined it. A voice in a sealed and empty church had spoken the name of the boy lying dead behind me, a name I did not know and could not have invented, and I had carried that sound in my head for 7 years, like a stone in shoe. I sat down on the cold library floor with the magazine, and a guard told me to get up, and I did not hear him. I read everything that prison library had about Carlo Acutis, and then I begged the Thursday chaplain, the man I had avoided for 2 years, to bring me more. He did. He brought me a folder, and he never asked me why a convicted thief of religious art was suddenly weeping over articles about a dead Italian teenager. I think he knew not to ask. Some men are wise enough to leave a door ajar and step back. This is what I learned in that cell about the boy whose tomb I had robbed. Carlo Acutis was born on the 3rd of May 1991 in London to Italian parents and raised in Milan. He was, by every account, an ordinary and extraordinary boy at once. He loved computers. He taught himself to code, built websites, played video games like any teenager. But he limited himself to 1 hour of gaming a week, a discipline that floored me, a man with no discipline left. He was funny. He was kind to the kind of classmates other kids ignored. He defended the bullied. He gave his pocket money to the homeless and brought them sleeping bags. And at the center of him was the Eucharist. From the age of 7, after his first communion, he went to Mass every single day. He called the Eucharist his highway to heaven. Those were his own words, a 15-year-old's words, and they have been printed in 100 languages since. Then I read the thing that made the floor of my certainty give away completely. Between the ages of 11 and 14, Carlo Acutis used his coding skills to build a website. not a game, not a teenage project. He built an online catalog documenting every approved Eucharistic miracle recognized by the Catholic Church across the world and across the centuries, more than 160 of them. He researched them, gathered the documentation, photographed the sites, and assembled it all into an exhibition that would, after his death, travel to thousands of parishes on every continent. A boy who would die at 15 spent his short life building, with patient hands, a permanent record of the moments when, the Church teaches, ordinary bread became warm with the presence of God. And a thief who felt nothing had broken into his tomb and felt, against his bare palms, an inexplicable warmth he could not measure, could not explain, and could not forget. I am not a man who believes easily, even now, but I sat in that Austrian cell with the magazine in my lap, and the two warmths, the warmth of those documented miracles the boy had spent his life chronicling, and the warmth of the glass over his own body, came together in my mind like two hands meeting, and I could not pull them apart again. I read on because I am the kind of man who needs the facts to be exact, and the facts about Carlo Acutis became, if anything, harder to dismiss. He died on the 12th of October 2006 at the San Gerardo Hospital in Monza of fulminant M3 leukemia, a leukemia so aggressive it takes a healthy child to death in days. He was 15, and as he was dying, in pain, he said he offered his suffering for the Pope and for the Church. A boy, offering the worst thing that can happen to a body, on purpose, for other people. His mother was named Antonia Salzano, and it was her words, which I read in a later interview the chaplain brought me, that planted the thing I now have to tell you about. The prediction with the place and the date that wasn't yet a date. Antonia Salzano said that Carlo, before he died, had spoken about his own death with a calm that frightened the adults around him. He told his family he was going to die. He told them more than once that he offered it all. And in the accounts I read, gathered from those close to the family, there was a recurring detail. Carlo had said he would not stay where he died. He said he wanted to be buried in Assisi, a town he had loved since boyhood, the town of St. Francis, whom he admired above all other saints. He had visited it. He had said, more or less, that Assisi was where he belonged. A 15-year-old in Milan, dying in a hospital in Monza, calmly directing where his body should go, to a basilica in a town 200 kilometers away, where 6 years before I ever read his name, a Polish thief would feel warm glass under his hands at 3 in the morning. The body was exhumed in 2019, years after my night there, and examined, and the report stated it was found integral, whole. And I remembered reading that, the softness of that face through the glass, the color of sleep, and I understood that what I had seen with my own criminal eyes had later been examined by men far more credible than me, and they had been unsettled by the same thing I had run from. Here is where the object, the wrapped parcel I had carried through all of it, pressed against my chest like a question I had refused to ask for 7 years. I had it with me, even in prison. They had let me keep it after an inspection. It was, as far as the guards could tell, a small, worn cloth bundle of no value, sentimental property, harmless. I had untied that knot 100 times in my mind, and never once with my hands, because some part of me knew that whatever was inside would not let me keep pretending, and pretending was the last thing I had left. I did not open it in that cell. I want you to know that, because the temptation in the telling is to rush to the reveal, and the truth is, I was a coward for 4 more years. But before I left that prison, the chaplain told me one more thing, and it is the prediction with the coordinates, and I need you to hold all 3 pieces of it. He told me that Carlo Acutis was on the path to canonization, and that the Church teaches such things move in their own time, by miracles, confirmed one by one. And then he said something offhand, the way wise men plant seeds without seeming to. He said, when God wants to reach a man, he doesn't always send him a priest. Sometimes he sends him a sickness, in the right place, at the right time, with the right name beside the bed. He was speaking generally. He was speaking, I would later understand, exactly about me, about a date not yet arrived, in a place I had already been, with a name I had already heard whispered in the dark. If you've carried this story with you this far, if there's a wrapped, unopened thing in your own life you've been afraid to untie, the novena is still there, the first link in the description, and you can pray it for the courage to open whatever you've been carrying. And if these traces of heaven mean something to you, this is where I keep gathering them. But what happened to me 2 years after I walked out of that prison is the reason I am able to tell you any of this at all, because it nearly killed me in the one city in the world I should have recognized. I was released in 2015. I did not rob anymore. I did not, however, become a saint. I became a tired, frightened, unemployed man in his late 40s with a criminal record and a cloth bundle he would not open. I drifted back toward Italy because the heart returns to the scene of its wound, and I took work where I could, as a locksmith, finally honest, fixing the very kind of doors I had spent my life defeating. And in the spring of 2017, I got sick. It came on the way the worst things come on, quietly. Fatigue I blamed on age. Bruises I blamed on the work. Then a nosebleed that would not stop, on a Tuesday, that frightened my landlord enough to drive me to a hospital. The nearest large hospital, because I happened to be doing a job near Monza that week, was the San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. I did not make the connection. I was bleeding and frightened, and I am ashamed to say that the name of the hospital where Carlo Acutis had died meant nothing to me in that moment of fear. They ran my blood. A young doctor, a woman with tired eyes, came to my bed with a folder and the careful voice they use when the news is bad. My white cell count was catastrophic. My platelets were almost gone. She said the word that I had read 2 years earlier on a prison library floor. Leukemia. Acute. The aggressive kind. And then she said the second thing, looking at her chart, and it was the name I had heard in the empty basilica 11 years before. Because she was not only my doctor. She introduced herself, as Italian doctors do, by her full name as she took my hand. And her surname, her family name, was the sound. The same sound. The name a voice had spoken into a sealed church over the body of a dead boy in 2006. I will not print her full name here, out of respect for her privacy, because she is a living woman and not a character in my confession. But I knew it the instant she said it. My whole body knew it. And I fell. I did not faint. I came off that hospital bed and went down onto the floor of the San Gerardo Hospital, the floor of the very building where Carlo Acutis had died of the very disease now killing me. And I did not get up. And the nurses thought it was shock, a collapse, a reaction to the diagnosis. And they were not wrong. But they were not right either. I was on my knees in a hospital, not that night in Assisi in 2006, here, in Monza, 11 years later, in the exact place the chaplain's words had pointed to without either of us knowing. The right sickness, the right place, the right name beside the bed. And finally, with my hands shaking the way they had shaken in that lower church, I asked a nurse to bring me my coat. I untied the knot. 11 years. One loop of plain twine. It came undone as easily as the lock on that side door had, in 40 seconds, as if it had only ever been waiting for me to be ready, and the cloth fell open in my lap on that hospital bed. Inside was a small notebook, a child's notebook, the cheap kind, with a soft cover worn smooth from someone's pocket, and tucked into it a single holy card with the image of the Eucharist, a host in a golden monstrance, and a few lines written on the inside cover in a careful teenage hand, in Italian. I do not know with certainty whose hand it was. I am not going to claim more than I can prove, because Carlo Acutis hated lies told in his name, and I will not start now. The notebook had been left at his tomb among hundreds of offerings. It could have been written by any pilgrim. But I will tell you what it said, and you can weigh it as I have weighed it every day since. It said in that careful hand, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." His own words, the words I would not read for another 7 years in a prison. And beneath them, a line that has never let me sleep easily again. Whoever finds this was not looking for it. He was found. And under that, a date, written as a day and a month, no year. The day and a month I was holding that notebook open in the San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. The exact day. I do not ask you to believe it. I lived it, and I barely believe it. A man can tell himself anything. That the date was coincidence, that 1 in 365 is not such long odds, that a frightened sick man reads meaning into anything. I told myself all of that, lying in that bed with the notebook on my chest. And then I thought of the warmth on the glass, 26.1 degrees in a room of 9, and the name in the empty church, and the boy who built a record of warm miracles, and then became one, and the place I had been brought to die, his place, and I stopped telling myself anything at all. I lay in the bed where, in a sense, a 15-year-old had taught the world that suffering could be offered up. And for the first time in my 50 years, I offered something. I offered my fear. I did not know how to pray, so I said his name. The name I'd heard at 3 in the morning. The name on my doctor's lips. I said it like a man calling for help in a language he is only now learning. The leukemia did not vanish. I want to be very careful here, because there are men who would sell you a miracle, and I am done selling things, holy or otherwise. I was treated, for months, chemotherapy in the same hospital, under the same tired-eyed doctor whose name I could not say without trembling. There were nights I was sure I would die in Monza, and I made my peace with dying in Monza, which is its own kind of grace. I did not die. I am not telling you Carlo Acutis healed me. The Church examines such claims with a rigor I respect far too much to mock with an amateur's testimony. 2 miracles were approved in his cause. A Brazilian boy named Matias, healed of a pancreatic defect in Campo Grande in 2013, and a young woman named Valeria Valverde from Costa Rica, healed after severe head trauma in 2022. And they were studied for years by doctors and theologians before the Church would say a word. I would never put my own recovery in that company. My doctors have explanations. Remission is a medical word, not a holy one. But I will tell you what was healed, that I can speak to without any priest's permission, because it happened inside me, where no scan reaches. The thief in me died in that bed. The man who felt nothing, who melted other people's prayers for 9,000 euros, who told his mother her candles were wasted wax. That man did not survive the San Gerardo hospital. Whatever walked out was someone else, someone slower and quieter and almost unbearably ashamed. And that shame was the most honest thing I had ever owned. When I was strong enough, I did the thing I should have done 11 years before. I took the notebook to Assisi. I went back to the basilica, not at 3 in the morning, in daylight, with the doors open and the pilgrims streaming in, the kind of people I had once stepped over to reach the gold. The boy had a proper tomb now, in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Assisi, and there was a line to see him, and I stood in it with the notebook in my coat, the same coat, and an old man's tears running into a collar I had once worn to commit crimes. I could not return what I had stolen in 2006. It had been melted and sold and scattered a decade ago. There is no giving back a melted chalice. That is the permanent ugliness of what I was, and I do not soften it. But I could return the notebook to the place it had been left. I knelt, really knelt this time, not collapsed, at the tomb of Carlo Acutis, and I saw his face again, through glass, the same face, sleep-soft, ordinary. And I confess I reached out and touched the glass with my bare hand, the way I had that night. It was not warm this time. It was ordinary glass, cool under my palm, in a basilica full of the living warmth of people who had come to love him. And I understood that the warmth had never been for the curious or the credible. It had been for the thief. It had been the one language a man like me could hear. God does not waste a miracle on a soul already kneeling. He spends it on the one in the dark with the crowbar. I gave the notebook to a priest there and told him a shortened, gentler version of how I'd come to have it. He listened the way the Thursday chaplain had listened, without flinching, and he did not call the police, and he took my hands, my locksmith's hands, my thief's hands, in his, and said only, "You were found." The same words. I had not told him about the line in the notebook. He could not have known. And yet, today I am 60 years old. I live quietly. I work honestly with the same hands, and I do something I could not have imagined that night in 2006. I tell this story, out loud, to whoever will hear it. I have told it in parish halls in Poland and in Italy. I told a version of it, with great fear, to 2 officials connected to the documentation of Carlo's cause. Not as a miracle, I would never claim that, but as a witness to the strangeness of that body and that tomb. Because a witness, even a criminal one, owes the truth. I was alive, and quietly, far back in a crowd that I will never forget, for the canonization. On the 7th of September 2025, Carlo Acutis was declared a saint by Pope Leo XIV in the Jubilee year, the first millennial saint, the one they call God's influencer, the patron of the internet, a 15-year-old in jeans and sneakers, raised to the altars. I stood among thousands. I had broken into his tomb, and there I was, in the light, weeping with the rest, a thief among the faithful, the most undeserving man in that entire square, and somehow, impossibly, allowed to be there at all. I want to say the last of it plainly. If this testimony has marked you as deeply as it marked my life, I ask you one thing. Subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear that no one is too far gone. Here we keep gathering the traces Carlo Acutis left all over the world. And if you want to carry something of this story with you, the free novena to Carlo Acutis is in the description, the first link right below this video. Pray it, share it, and keep his memory alive. Pray it as a family, for whoever you carry. I was a thief in the dark, and I felt warm glass under my hands, and I ran. It took me 11 years to stop running. Carlo Acutis said the Eucharist was his highway to heaven, and a 15-year-old built a record of every place that highway had touched the earth, and then his own body became one more trace of it, warm in a cold church at 3 in the morning, for a man who believed in nothing. The traces of heaven are everywhere, even on the glass of a tomb, even under the hands of the man who came to rob it. You only have to know how to look.